He never lost a battle. By the age of 30, he had carved out one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen, stretching from Greece to the very edge of India. His name was Alexander, and more than 2,000 years after his death, we still call him the Great. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedon, a rugged kingdom on the northern fringe of the Greek world. His father was King Philip II, a brilliant and ruthless reformer. His mother, Olympias, was a fiercely ambitious princess who told her son that he was descended from the hero Achilles. From the age of 13, Alexander was tutored by one of the greatest minds in history, the philosopher Aristotle. Under him, Alexander studied science, medicine, and Homer's tales of war and glory. He is said to have slept with a copy of the Iliad and a dagger beneath his pillow. One famous story captures the boy he was. When no one could control a magnificent wild horse named Bucephalus, the young Alexander noticed that the animal was frightened of its own shadow. He turned it toward the sun and calmed it. Bucephalus would carry him across the world. Alexander's talents revealed themselves early. In 338 BC, at just 18 years old, he commanded the cavalry on the left wing at the Battle of Chaeronea. His decisive charge helped shatter the elite Theban sacred band and broke the last great resistance of the southern Greek cities, leaving Macedon the undisputed master of Greece. His father Philip had transformed Macedon's army into the most fearsome fighting force of the age, armed with the sarissa, a pike nearly 6 meters long. With it, Philip mastered the squabbling city-states of Greece. Then, in 336 BC, at a royal wedding, Philip was suddenly assassinated. At just 20 years old, Alexander seized the throne. He moved swiftly and mercilessly to crush all opposition. When the city of Thebes rose in revolt, he destroyed it almost completely, sparing only its temples, and, the story goes, the house of the poet Pindar. Greece fell silent, but Alexander's true ambition lay east, across the sea, in the vast Persian Empire that had once invaded Greece itself. In 334 BC, he led an army of around 40,000 men across the Hellespont into Asia. As his ship neared the shore, he is said to have hurled his spear into the sand, claiming Asia as a prize won by conquest. Before the campaign truly began, Alexander made a pilgrimage to the ruins of Troy. He had grown up idolizing Achilles, the hero of the Iliad, and now laid a wreath at the tomb said to be his. From the temple of Athena, he took down an ancient shield, which he would carry into his battles ever after. His first great test came at the Granicus River, where the Persian governors massed their cavalry on the far bank. Alexander charged straight across the water at the head of his companion cavalry and plunged into the thick of the fighting. He was nearly killed, but the gamble shattered the Persian line. Marching on, Alexander reached the city of Gordium, where an ancient ox cart was bound by an impossibly tangled knot. Legend promised that whoever loosed it would rule all of Asia. Rather than pick at the knot, Alexander, in the most famous version of the tale, simply drew his sword and cut it in two. In 333 BC, he finally faced the Persian king himself, Darius III, on the narrow coastal plain of Issus. Though heavily outnumbered, Alexander drove his cavalry directly toward Darius. The great king panicked and fled the field, abandoning his treasury and even his own family to capture. Rather than chase Darius, Alexander turned south to secure the coast. The island city of Tyre defied him from behind its walls, so Alexander built a great causeway out across the sea itself. After a brutal siege lasting 7 months, Tyre fell, and his reputation for relentlessness grew darker still. Egypt welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. There, on the Mediterranean coast, he founded a new city and gave it his name, Alexandria, destined to become one of the greatest centers of learning in the world. He then journeyed deep into the desert to the oracle of Amun, who, it was said, greeted him as the son of a god. The final reckoning with Persia came in 331 BC at Gaugamela, on a wide plain that Darius had specially prepared for his massive army and his scythed chariots. Alexander let the Persian lines stretch and gap, then struck at the opening like a thunderbolt, aiming once more straight for Darius himself. Again, Darius fled, and his empire lay open. Alexander entered the fabulous cities of Babylon and Susa, and then Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire. There, the magnificent royal palace was burned to the ground, whether by drunken revelry or cold revenge, no one can say for certain. Darius, now a king without a kingdom, was murdered by one of his own commanders, Bessus. Alexander, who had wanted to capture his rival alive, reportedly covered the dead king's body with his own cloak. He now claimed the title that Darius had lost, the King of Asia. But Alexander did not stop. He drove his weary men ever eastward, through the harsh mountains and deserts of Central Asia, hunting rebels for years. One stronghold seemed beyond reach, a fortress perched on the sheer cliffs of the Sogdian rock. Alexander offered a fortune to whoever could scale it. Some 300 men climbed through the night with iron tent pegs and rope, and the astonished defenders surrendered. Among the captives was a young noblewoman named Roxana. In Bactria, Alexander married Roxana, a union meant to bind his sprawling new empire together. He had begun to imagine something new, not merely a conquered Persia, but a blended realm in which Macedonian and Persian might one day rule side by side. To that end, he increasingly adopted Persian dress and royal customs, and asked his followers to bow before him as subjects bowed to the great king. Many of his proud Macedonian veterans were appalled. Tensions boiled over, and in one drunken quarrel, Alexander killed his close friend Clitus, a death he is said to have mourned with terrible grief. In 326 BC, Alexander pushed into India. At the Hydaspes River, in driving monsoon rain, he faced King Porus and a line of war elephants his men had never confronted before. It was among his hardest-fought victories. Impressed by his defeated enemy's courage, Alexander allowed Porus to keep his kingdom as an ally. Alexander dreamed of marching on to the end of the world. But at the Hyphasis River, his exhausted soldiers finally refused to take another step. They had marched for 8 years and thousands of miles. For the first time, the great conqueror was forced to turn back. The return journey became a catastrophe. Leading part of his army through the scorching Gedrosian desert, Alexander lost thousands of men to heat, thirst, and starvation, by some accounts more than he had ever lost in battle. At last, the ragged survivors staggered back into the heart of his empire. Back in the Persian heartland, Alexander pushed his dream of unity to its height. In the city of Susa, in 324 BC, he staged an enormous mass wedding, marrying scores of his officers to Persian and Median noblewomen in a single grand ceremony, while Alexander himself took a daughter of Darius as his bride. But his soldiers' patience was wearing thin. At the city of Opis, when Alexander announced he would send his oldest veterans home, the army erupted in mutiny, resentful of the Persians now serving in their ranks. Alexander faced them down, then held a vast banquet of reconciliation, praying that Macedonians and Persians might rule together in harmony. Then tragedy struck. Hephaestion, Alexander's closest companion since boyhood and his most trusted general, fell suddenly ill and died. Alexander was shattered. He is said to have mourned for days without food, ordered a colossal funeral pyre raised in his friend's honor, and never truly recovered from the loss. In 323 BC, in the ancient palace of Babylon, Alexander fell gravely ill after a banquet. For days, he burned with fever, slowly losing the power of speech. On the 13th day, he died. He was just 32 years old. To this day, no one knows for certain whether it was disease or poison that killed him. On his deathbed, asked to whom he left his empire, he is said to have whispered only to the strongest. Almost at once, his generals turned upon one another. In the long decades of war that followed, the empire he had bled to build was torn apart into rival kingdoms. Yet Alexander's true legacy was not a single empire, but a transformed world. Greek language, art, and ideas fused with the cultures of Egypt and Asia to create the brilliant Hellenistic age. The dozens of cities he founded became beacons of trade and learning for centuries to come. A boy from a small northern kingdom had reshaped the ancient world before the age of most modern graduates. His tomb is lost, his empire long gone, but his legend endures. If you enjoyed his story, subscribe for more journeys into the history.